I can't believe what I just saw. These were the words that slipped out of my mouth as I stood frozen on the edge of the narrow cliff path above Sunset Point in Big Sur, California. It was exactly 3:17 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, September 14th. 2023, and the fog rolled in from the Pacific Ocean, leaving a damp smell of salt and wet pine in the air. I had been hiking the old Rattlesnake Trail. For almost 2 hours, my boots, soaked with dew from the early morning, and my camera bag, weighing precisely 12 pounds pressed against my chest. I had been planning this hike for 3 months, saving $326 just for the permit and gas to get my old 2007 Honda Civic. To the trailhead, my knees were sore, my shoulders tight, and the air smelled faintly of burnt coffee from the small cafe down on Highway 1, where I had stopped to grab a latte around 10:45 a.m. As I rounded the bend near the infamous Sunset Overlook, I saw them, a family of a father about 42 wearing a faded red flannel shirt, and Jean's the mother, 39, in a green windbreaker, holding on to her youngest son, who looked maybe 6 years old, and a daughter slightly older, around 10. The father was pointing at something down the cliffside, and the kids were giggling nervously. I remember thinking how ordinary it looked, how peaceful, yet in the back of my mind a cold knot of unease twisted tighter. As I watched the father take a step backward over a patch of loose gravel, the mother shouted, "Watch out," her voice cracking with panic, and the children screamed, "Dad, no." In unison, it all happened in what felt like slow motion. The father slipped, his foot skidded on the loose stones, and for a terrifying moment, it looked as if the family was going to tumble off the 25-foot cliff. I froze, clutching my camera, shaking the strap in my hand, recording my own heartbeat thumping like a drum in my ears. The mist swirled around them, and the smell of damp earth and wet pine filled my nostrils. The youngest boy's shoes were bright red and practically glowing in the gray. Light, the daughter, clutched a stuffed tiger. I remember seeing the stripes and the way the fabric was worn smooth from constant hugging. The mother screamed, "Hold on to me." And then suddenly the world paused. I could hear nothing but the wind whistling past the trees, the distant horn of a car on Highway 1, and the mother's voice trembling. And then just as I was about to shout or run, or do something I couldn't explain, a miracle or something even stranger occurred. They moved as if nothing had happened. The father stepped back on the solid ground. The mother exhaled sharply, wiping her damp hair from her face. The kids hugged each other, laughing nervously. I could barely process what I was seeing. My knees almost gave out. I gripped my camera tighter and whispered, "Did that really just happen?" A hiker passing by on the trail behind me asked, "Are you okay?" I turned and muttered, "I think I just witnessed a miracle." He laughed nervously, shaking his head, and continued up the path. I looked down at my phone. It was 3:18 p.m., precisely 1 minute after what I thought was certain disaster. I felt my chest tighten, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. I could see the mist clearing slightly, revealing the jagged edges of the cliff below and the sparkling blue of the Pacific far beneath the rocks. And in that moment, I realized how fragile life was and how quickly everything could change in the blink of an eye. I raised my camera and whispered, under my breath, "This needs to be documented." The air smelled faintly of roasted coffee, still lingering from my latte, and the wind carried the distant faint laughter of tourists down at the beach. And I remember that exact summer in 1976, when I was 12, my family had taken me to Santa Cruz, and I watched the waves crash against the pier, feeling a similar thrill and terror. At the same time, nostalgia and fear mixing into one. I thought about my own kids now grown and how easily something could go wrong. I felt a surge of protectiveness and outrage. All at once, how could anyone be so careless, so unaware? I wanted to scream at them, yet also applaud their luck. It was intoxicating and terrified at the same time. I remembered overhearing a couple of teenagers at the cafe that morning saying, "The cliff over there is crazy, watch your step." And now I understood exactly why the warning existed. The leaves on the trees were starting to turn golden orange and deep crimson. In the early fall sunlight, the faint smell of wet soil from the fog made the scene almost cinematic. I could see the father crossing his arms and the mother running her hands through her hair with a mixture of relief and embarrassment, and the children skipping around unaware of the close call. I whispered into my camera microphone, "This is unreal. This is exactly why we respect nature and respect life." And then I typed rapidly into my notes app, "Family almost fell off cliff, Sunset Point, 3:17 p.m., September 14th. 2023, father 42, mother 39, son 6, daughter 10, red shoes, green windbreaker, flannel shirt." I wanted every detail recorded, the textures, the sounds, the colors, the smell, the exact moment, everything. And I asked out loud to myself, and anyone watching, have you ever seen something so close to disaster yet? So bizarrely intact, share your story below because I need to know I am not alone. The mist thickened slightly again, and I could barely see the cliff edge. The wind whistled through the pine trees, making a haunting melody. I knew in that moment that what I had witnessed was just the beginning, that something else was going to happen that day, and I had a gut feeling I needed to stay put and watch everything unfold. It was intoxicating, the adrenaline, the fear, the awe. I wanted to move closer, but my body refused. I was frozen, yet fully aware, every detail etched into my memory. The father adjusted his hat, the mother sighed, and the children clung to their stuffed toys. I remember thinking, in 15 minutes someone will realize this, and everything will change. And I looked around, hoping someone else had seen it. And indeed, a middle-aged couple on the opposite trail edge had stopped to gape and were filming on their phones. "Oh my God," the woman whispered as a man shook his head. "How did they just survive that?" I whispered into my camera, "Exactly what you think just happened, but wait until you see what happens next." And I felt a shiver of anticipation, knowing that the story was just starting and that the twist would leave everyone questioning reality. And I turned to the camera one last time, saying, if you ever thought life was predictable, leave a comment below, because you will not believe what comes next. The sun glinted off the foggy mist, the cliff edge shimmered like a knife, and the family now seemed almost ghost-like, their laughter echoing against the rock below. And I realized that witnessing a life almost lost and yet intact was just the beginning of an unbelievable story, and the hairs on my arms stood on end, and I knew right then that everything was about to change forever, and that in exactly 15 minutes I would see something no one would believe. If you have ever felt fear mixed with awe, type it below and stay tuned, because the real story has only just begun. I have been coming to Big Sur for almost 2 decades, every summer since 2004, when I first drove up from San Diego with a beat-up 1998 Toyota Corolla, carrying a tent sleeping bag and exactly $582 in cash that I had saved from 2 months of overtime at the local hardware store. My parents had always told me, "Wilson, you're too cautious sometimes, but you'll learn to appreciate the little things." And I learned to appreciate the smell of pine needles after a morning fog, the sound of waves crashing against jagged cliffs, and the feel of rough bark under my fingertips on the old cypress trees. I spent countless hours hiking these trails, every step memorized, every turn the path familiar. And yet each year something changed, the colors of the leaves, the way the mist hung over the ocean like a delicate veil. In 2012, I remember staying at a small inn in Carmel by the sea, called the Seaside Haven, paying $736 a night for a room with a balcony overlooking the ocean. I woke up at exactly 6:15 a.m. every morning, drinking a cup of coffee whose aroma filled the room, and watched the sun rise over the Pacific. I even wrote down the temperature every day, 58 degrees Fahrenheit, with a slight breeze from the north. I had a system for everything: my cameras, my notebooks, my hiking gear, everything cataloged and carefully maintained. And yet nothing could prepare me for what I had seen that Thursday afternoon. I remembered thinking back to 1998, when my mother called me after my first college semester and said, "Wilson, we're proud of you, but remember, family comes first." I nodded over the phone and smiled, even though I was living in a tiny dorm room with peeling wallpaper and a shower that leaked water everywhere. And in those moments, I realized I had always invested so much in observing life, appreciating moments, noticing details most people overlooked. I had given my weekend, my vacations, my savings, and even a portion of my heart to these experiences. And now watching that family at Sunset Point, I couldn't shake the sense that all the careful planning, all the years of attention to detail and love of life led me to witness exactly this scene. I had brought my binoculars with me on this hike, weighing precisely 3 pounds, and adjusted them at exactly 3:05 p.m. to focus on the cliff edge. The straps dug slightly into my shoulders, and I could feel the rough texture of the canvas pressing against my skin. I remembered my last hike in 2019 with my neighbor Susan, who at 68 still wore bright yellow hiking boots. She had said, "Wilson, you're obsessed with documenting every little thing." And I had laughed nervously because I knew she was right. And yet that obsession had made me notice the subtle changes in the landscape, the small cracks in the rocks, the way shadows moved across the cliff at different times of day, as if time itself was watching. And I remember bringing sandwiches from a tiny deli in Monterey, paid $18.47 for a turkey and Swiss on sourdough with extra Pickles, the smell of mustard and bread mixing in the air, and laughing with Susan as a seagull tried to steal a piece of her sandwich. Those little moments of investment and attention to detail added up to this moment, now standing on the cliff, watching a family nearly fall and then move as if nothing had happened. It made me think about all the investments I had made in noticing life, the sacrifices I had made missing family gatherings, traveling alone, spending exactly 72 hours researching the safest trails and exits just to be prepared for emergencies, all of it coming together to put me in the perfect place at the perfect moment. I noticed the father checking his watch, a gold Rolex glinting in the sunlight. I could see the mother wiping her glasses with the corner of her green windbreaker. She muttered, "I can't believe we're still okay." And the children laughed nervously while holding hands and their tiny sneakers scuffed along the gravel. I remember my own children at that exact age, playing hide and seek in the backyard of our old house on Willow Street in Sacramento. My daughter Anna, at 10 with her hair tied in 2 braids, and my son Jacob at 6 wearing a blue t-shirt with a cartoon rocket. I remember telling them, "Be careful, stay together." And now seeing this other family, I felt a strange connection across time and space, as if my own parental instincts merged with the observer's. Awe and disbelief. I adjusted my camera lens again, focusing on the mother's face, her eyes wide, with relief yet tinged with embarrassment. "We really should be more careful," she said under her breath, and I whispered to myself, "You have no idea," and thought about the countless warnings and signs I'd seen in trail guides and local range reports over the years. 18 reports of near falls in this exact area since 2010, each one recorded with exact date and time, and yet most hikers ignored the signs. I remembered vividly my first ranger talk in 2007 at the Big Sur Visitor Center, how the ranger had said, "The cliff edges are unpredictable, stay at least 10 feet away from the edge." And I nodded like I understood, and now years later, I understood fully, seeing the subtle dangers in the cracks, the loose stones, and the fog that can change visibility. In seconds, I could smell the damp earth as the fog rolled over the path, and the wind carried the faint aroma of salt and eucalyptus from the neighboring forest. The family laughed again nervously, and the father muttered, "I guess we'll tell the kids to be more careful next time." And I thought about my own father teaching me to respect the ocean. One wrong step, and it's over, Wilson. And it stuck with me through all the years I had been documenting nature and human behavior. I could hear distant voices of other hikers commenting on the scene. "Did you see that?" a man asked, shaking his head. They almost went over, and I whispered into my camera, "Just wait, this is going to get even stranger." The mist thickened once more, and the faint creak of a wooden railing somewhere below reminded me of the fragility of everything around me and how easily a lifetime of careful observation could intersect with a single miraculous moment. And I asked out loud, "What would you do if you were here? What choice would you make if faced with such a moment?" And I typed into my notes, "Investment in observation pays off, Wilson. 20 years training, 18 near fall. Reports 3:17 p.m. miracle at Sunset Point." And I knew that all the preparation, the investments in time, energy, and attention were not for nothing, that every hour spent studying life had led me to witness exactly this. And I whispered again, "Stay tuned, because the story is just starting. You'll see in a few minutes how this seemingly ordinary family reveals something extraordinary." And I felt a thrill knowing that what I had invested in noticing life will reward me with one of the most bizarre and unforgettable experiences of my entire life. By 3:25 p.m., the air had thickened with tension, the fog hugging the jagged rocks below like a silent witness. I could feel my pulse quicken as I watched the family begin to descend a narrow, worn path toward a small observation ledge. The father's steps were slow, deliberate, his flannel shirt damp from sweat. The mother held on to the railing, painted a dull green, but chipped from years of exposure. The children clinging to their stuffed toys, their faces a mixture of excitement and apprehension. And then it happened. A loose stone slipped under the father's boot. He stumbled forward, and I could hear him mutter, "Oh no, not again." The mother shouted, "Careful, watch your step." And the words hit me like a knife. I remembered seeing precisely 14 similar incidents in the local ranger logs dating back to 2010, 3 of which had resulted in minor injuries. And yet the recklessness persisted, and I gripped my camera tighter, my fingers cold and clammy against the textured strap, the sound of gravel crunching under their feet mixed with the distant call of the seagull overhead. And I noticed a group of tourists on the lower trail taking videos, their voices rising in alarm. "Look out!" One yelled, "They're going to fall." And the father froze for a second, his eyes wide with panic. And then he regained composure. The mother scowled at him, muttering, "Do you even care about your kids?" and I could almost feel the humiliation radiating off her in waves. The daughter tripped over a protruding root and her red shoes scuffed the dirt. She fell lightly onto her knees, and I could see the scrape forming on her palm. I whispered, "Oh, no, no, no." But no one heard me except for the couple filming from the opposite edge. "Did you see that?" The woman whispered, shaking her head, while the man murmured, "Someone should stop them." I could feel the family's stress as if it were my own body, the father's hands shaking as he adjusted the straps of his backpack, the mother muttering every few steps, we'll be fine yet." The words carried an edge of desperation, and I could sense the embarrassment building each step. They took the sun, had shifted slightly, casting long shadows over the trail, the mist rolling in patches, creating almost a theatrical stage for their struggle to wind, carried a faint smell of roasted coffee from the small cafe 2 miles down Highway 1, blending with the damp pine and salty ocean air, and I realized the scene was becoming almost unbearable to witness their humiliation, exposed not only to each other, but to the hikers and tourists who were now stopping and whispering and filming. I could see the father pause at 3:27 p.m., checking his worn Casio watch, muttering, "I just wanted a family hike. Why is this so hard?" And the mother's eyes flashed with irritation. "Because you don't pay attention, Wilson." I laughed quietly under my breath, knowing it was going to be an intense lesson for them. The children whispered to each other, "Daddy, it's okay." Their voices trembling yet attempting comfort. And it struck me how innocence often bore the brunt of adult mistakes. I could feel my chest tighten, attention almost physical, and I typed notes rapidly. Father 42 flannel shirt stumble, 3:25 p.m. mother 39 green windbreaker irritation, 3:26 p.m. daughter 10 scrape, right hand son 6 red shoes holding tight. I wanted every detail for the record because this was a perfect example of escalating humiliation. I remembered back in 1982 when I was 11 at a school talent show, my best friend tripped on stage. And everyone laughed. The humiliation still lingered in my mind decades later. And now I could feel it all over again, except magnified by life and risk. I whispered into my camera, "Notice the arrogance, the repeated mistakes, and the inability to heed warnings. It's a lesson in human behavior." And at 3:29 p.m., the father leaned against a railing for a second, looked around, realizing the tourists filming were whispering and pointing, and muttered, "This is ridiculous." The mother folded her arms, glaring at him. Ridiculous isn't even a word. And I could see his pride bruised, but also a subtle shift in awareness. He was realizing the way of his actions. The daughter clutched her stuffed tiger tightly, whispering, "I'm scared." And I felt an emotional punch in my gut. The son held on to his mother's jacket silently, and I noticed a faint tear glistening on his cheek. The witnesses on the trail exchanged comments. "Look at that poor kid. How can they be so careless?" And I typed furiously, "Testimony." Emotional collective fear, 3:30 p.m. observation witness engagement. And I realized how the crowd's presence amplified their embarrassment and intensified the drama. The mother's voice rose sharply. "I swear if you don't focus, this is going to end badly." And the father nodded, muttering under his breath, "I hear you." But the look on his face betrayed frustration mixed with shame. I felt my hands trembling with adrenaline as I documented every scuff, every misstep, every strained expression. And then the line was crossed. The father tripped on a loose rock. The son screamed, "Daddy, no." The daughter gasped, and I could hear the mother exclaim sharply, "Hold on now." But before disaster struck, they somehow regained balance. The collective gasp of the tourists rang out, "Oh my God." They almost fell, and I whispered into my camera, "This is exactly the moment where tolerance and humiliation peaks and change becomes inevitable." And I remembered a tiny lesson my mother told me after I was humiliated in middle school. "Wilson, always pay attention to the details and respect the forces around you." And now seeing this family, I understood it fully. The stakes were real and the emotional intensity undeniable. The air smelled faintly of eucalyptus, now mixed with the mist, and the sound of the waves below was louder, almost threatening. The father exhaled sharply at 3:33 p.m. "I think we're done for today." And the mother muttered, "Done but shaken." The children laughed nervously, trying to dispel the tension. And I whispered, "Wait, this isn't the end. Stay with me. The story is far from over." The sun dipped slightly, and the shadows stretched long across the trail. And I felt the intensity building, knowing that this escalation of humiliation was a setup for a pivotal moment that would completely change the dynamic. And I whispered again, "What would you do if every mistake was witnessed and judged, and yet somehow there was a twist coming that no one expected? Stay tuned, because it's about to unfold." By 3:40 p.m., the fog had thickened even more, rolling across the cliff edge and making the jagged rocks below almost disappear into a white haze. I felt a strange clarity settle over me, As I watched the family pause at the top of the narrow path, the father's shoulders slumped slightly, as if carrying the weight of the past 30 minutes of near disasters. The mother's hands shook as she adjusted her damp green windbreaker and muttered under her breath, "I can't believe this is happening again." The children clutched each other tightly, whispering, "We'll be okay." And I could feel their anxiety radiating through the mist of tourists around us murmured among themselves, "This is insane. How do they survive?" And their phones hovered, capturing every tense moment. But at that instant, something clicked in my mind, a realization that I could no longer be a passive observer, that the sequence of mistakes, the escalating humiliation, and the exposure of their vulnerability had reached a point where inaction was no longer an option. I remember precisely at 3:41 p.m. thinking back to a minor incident in 2015 when I witnessed a hiker slip on a damp rock and nearly fall into a canyon. I had frozen then too and regretted it for months. The lesson burned into me, and now I could see that same moment repeating in a different form. The father glanced at the railing, and his eyes reflected a mixture of fear and pride. He whispered, "I think I've got this," and I realized that pride alone would not prevent disaster. The mother's eyes darted around, scanning the tourist path in the fog. She exhaled sharply. "We need to be careful now." And I felt a surge of indignation, a mixture of protective instinct and moral responsibility. And I knew exactly what I needed to do. I adjusted my camera strap tight against my chest, noting precise weight, 12 pounds. And every breath I took filled my lungs with the damp, pine-scented air. The mist kissed my cheeks, and I could feel the chill of the cliff wind against my neck. I whispered under my breath, "Not this time. I won't just watch." I noticed the subtle details, the father's boots scuffing the loose gravel, the mother's slightly hunched posture, signaling exhaustion, the daughter's small hands gripping the stuffed tiger, the son's eyes wide and alert, and I knew the next steps had to be calculated, not emotional. I crouched slightly to steady myself and whispered into my camera, "The turning point is here, the moment where passivity ends and action begins." I remember the detail from my own past that fueled me, my father teaching me at age 12 to respect the forces around me. "Wilson, never wait until it's too late. Observe, act, and protect." Those words echoed, and I realized I had been given exactly this opportunity. One could feel the power hidden within me for decades, years of observation, calculation, and preparation ready to be applied in real time. I noticed a group of tourists further down the trail whispering, "Someone should do something," and I realized no one would act without a decision being made. I took a deep breath and focused on the family. The father adjusting his hat, the mother running her hands through her damp hair, the children shuffling nervously. And I whispered, "This is the calm before the storm." Because inside me, I was preparing for a precise intervention. The sun broke slightly through the mist, casting golden streaks across the path, highlighting the gravel and railing. I memorized every inch of the terrain, the loose stones, the mossy patches, the slippery spots, and I began to formulate a plan to subtly guide them to safety without panic. I remembered exactly at 3:42 p.m. how a minor misstep could escalate into catastrophe, and I whispered, "This is the moment where a lifetime of attention and investment in detail pays off." I noticed the father muttering, "I think we can make it," but his eyes betrayed uncertainty. The mother shook her head slightly, "Not without help," and it struck me that they needed an unseen force guiding them. I realized I had that role, and a surge of quiet empowerment coursed through me. I adjusted my footing, feeling the rough texture of the dirt under my boots, my fingers cold against the camera strap, and I whispered, "I will be the balance between chaos and order, the silent protector." The children giggled nervously, but the sound was tinged with relief, their fear tangible, yet fading slightly as they trusted the subtle presence of someone attentive. I noted in my journal, turning point 3:42. PM action, clarity, empowerment, observer role, engagement, strategic preparation. And I could see the tourists around us still filming, yet unaware that the real shift was happening within me, a calm, deliberate awareness that would change everything. And I whispered into my camera, "Stay with me. This is where everything pivots, where humiliation ends and transformation begins. A twist is coming, and it's about to reveal everything." The wind carried the faint aroma of wet earth and pine mixed with distance softened the ocean waves below. The mist swirled around a family and me, and I felt a strange exhilaration, the kind that comes from knowing that witnessing is no longer enough, and that careful action, guided by observation and preparation, will determine the outcome. I watched the father take a deliberate step back from the edge. The mother exhaled sharply. The children clutched each other tighter, and I whispered, "In exactly 15 minutes, the situation will transform completely, and those who doubt will realize the magnitude of what they are witnessing." I typed into my notes, Empowerment moment clarity decision, 3:42 p.m. strategic calm before storm, and felt the satisfaction of knowing that all the meticulous preparation, every sacrifice, every lesson and observation would soon pay off as the family's fate teetered between chaos and revelation, and I whispered again, "Stay tuned, what happens next will redefine what you thought possible and test the limits of human perception." And fortune. At exactly 3:45 p.m., the atmosphere shifted, the mist swirling around Sunset Point thickened, and the sunlight broke through in golden slivers, casting dramatic shadows across the narrow cliff path. I felt the weight of every observer's gaze. Even though no one knew I was about to reveal something no one expected, the father took a tentative step toward the railing, his flannel shirt damp, and clinging to his shoulders the mother's green. Windbreakers shimmered faintly in the filtered sunlight, and I could see the children's wide eyes following every move. The tourists around us were still whispering and filming. "Look at that," one muttered. "They're barely holding on." And in that moment, I realized the full scale of what was about to happen. I had spent decades preparing, not just physically, but mentally cataloging hazards, human behavior, and potential interventions. And now all of it converged into this one miraculous revelation. I adjusted my camera tight against my chest, 12 pounds of weight, and felt my fingers on the textured strap as I whispered under my breath, "Now the truth comes to light." And I stepped slightly closer, making sure my presence was noticed. But without startling anyone, the father glanced at me, briefly confusion flickering in his eyes. I raised my hand slightly, signaling a calm reassurance. And at that moment, a subtle change passed through the mother's hands, unclenched, the children exhaled. And I could see the first glimmer of relief. They didn't know why yet the tension that had gripped them for the last 28 minutes was shifting slowly. The tourist gasped as I spoke. "Step carefully, follow my lead, and you'll be fine." The father's jaw dropped slightly. "Who are you?" he asked nervously, and I smiled faintly. "Just someone who's been watching and knows the way," the mother muttered under her breath. "How is this possible?" And I noticed the father's eyes widen as I retrieved from my backpack a detailed map of the trail, with exact measurements of all loose stones and previous near-fall incidents dated from 2010 to 2022, and highlighted safe footing paths marked in green, my handwriting precise, and annotated with exact times. 3:17 p.m. September 14th, 2023, near Fall, Sunset Point family 4. The mother's hands shook slightly. "Where did you get this?" she whispered, and I replied, "Years of observation experience and paying attention to details most people ignore." The children looked at me wide-eyed. "Wow," the daughter whispered, clutching her stuffed tiger, the sons. Red shoes scuffed the gravel nervously, and I realized a subtle power shift was occurring, not because of force, but because of knowledge, preparation, and calm presence. The tourists around us gasped again. "Who is he? How does he know?" And I could see phones tilting to record me. Now the father cleared his throat. "I had no idea," he said, and I could see his pride shift to awe. The mother exhaled sharply. "We've been so reckless," and the children giggled nervously, trying to hide relief. I guided them subtly down the path, pointing at stable stones underfoot, noting precise distances and timing their steps. "Hold here for 2 seconds, then move slowly 3 steps to the right, then pause." And they followed hesitantly, but perfectly, the tension dissolving with every measured movement. I felt the power that had been dormant for decades within me manifest through every instruction, every calm word, every precise gesture. I whispered into my camera, "This is a true revelation, not in chaos, but in measured control and unseen guidance." The tourists whispered among themselves, "I can't believe this, he's saving them. It's incredible." And I noticed one middle-aged woman nodding emphatically, murmuring, "This man knows exactly what he's doing." The father looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "I don't even know your name." And I replied calmly, "Call me Wilson, just follow the instructions." The mother exhaled sharply. I never imagined anyone could be this prepared, and I realized in that moment that the combination of experience, careful observation, and subtle intervention had shifted the dynamic completely. The family descended further, the fog still thick around their feet, yet the tension now replaced by trust. Every footfall guided precisely, every handhold safe and calculated. The children laughed nervously, yet genuinely, now relief palpable. The tourists filmed everything, mesmerized, whispering, "This is unreal. I wish I could do this." And I realized that the real power lay in preparation and timing, not arrogance or force. I held the annotated map, in one hand a camera, in the other my heart, racing not from fear, but from the intoxicating clarity of control over a potentially catastrophic situation. I whispered under my breath, "The revelation is complete. They will remember this forever." The father glanced at the annotated notes and whispered, "I see every danger now. I understand the risk." The mother nodded her head slowly. We underestimated everything, and I smiled. Faintly, the children clutched their toys, still trembling slightly, and I whispered, "Just a little more careful, and you'll be safe." By 3:50 p.m., they reached the widest part of the trail, the sun now breaking fully through the fog, highlighting the cliff edges. The tourists erupted into whispered applause, many capturing the moment on phones and cameras. The father muttered, "I can't believe it. We actually made it down safely." The mother exhaled sharply. Thanks to him. And I could see the collective realization across the onlookers' faces that what they had witnessed was extraordinary preparation applied at precisely the right moment. The children laughed genuinely, now the sun hopping slightly. We did it. And the daughter clutching her tiger. "I can't believe it." I whispered again into my camera. This is the shift of revelation of power, when knowledge and calm intersect with human vulnerability. The mist rolled, slightly dissipating, as if nature itself acknowledged the turn in the story, and I typed into my notes, Revelation 3 verse 45 p.m., Sunset Point family guided safely, knowledge intervention, witness shock empowerment. And I knew that in that exact moment, the humiliation and fear transformed into awe and gratitude for both the family and the onlookers, and I whispered under my breath, "If this shocked you, just wait until the consequences unfold in real time, and the full justice and transformation become visible." By 3:55 p.m., the sun had fully pierced the fog at Sunset Point, illuminating every jagged edge of the cliff. The family now standing safely on the wide observation ledge, looking relieved, but still processing what had just occurred. The father's flannel shirt damp from sweat. He ran a hand through his hair, muttering, "I can't believe how close that was." The mother adjusted her green windbreaker, exhaling sharply. We owe everything to him. And I felt the weight of their gratitude as if it solidified in the crisp Pacific air around us. I noticed the tourists capturing every moment, their whispers audible. "Did you see that? He saved them. Unbelievable." And I realized collective awareness of everyone present was a subtle form of justice unfolding in real time. The father turned slightly toward me, his eyes wide. "Wilson, you have to tell us how you knew." And I held up the annotated map and camera. Years of observation, attention to detail, and preparation, every near-fall report, every hazard logged. Precisely now applied in real time. The mother nodded her head sharply. We were reckless and ignorant. The children held on to each other, laughing nervously, yet genuinely relieved. The atmosphere shifted further when one of the tourists said, "I think everyone should know this man's methods. Maybe the rangers could learn something." And suddenly the local park ranger appeared from the trail behind us, checking his clipboard and muttering. Reports of near misses again. I stepped forward, calmly showing him the annotated notes and time-stamped photos. Exactly what happened here today, 3:17 p.m. near fall, Sunset Point family, guided safely. He blinked, rapidly looking at the detailed records. This is incredible." And the family exhaled together. The father muttered, "I feel humiliated realizing how unprepared we were, but also grateful beyond words." And the mother nodded. "We were reckless and arrogant." I noticed a subtle shift in their demeanor. The humiliation they had endured now transformed into acknowledgement of their mistakes, and the immediate correction brought them a palpable sense of relief. The ranger nodded toward the tourist's document. "Everything this is a rare example of observation applied perfectly." And the witnesses whispered among themselves, "I never thought anyone could prevent disaster like that. Look at the precision, the calm." I typed rapidly into my notes. Consequences immediate, 3:55 p.m. Sunset Point family safe, guided intervention, witnesses astonished. Empowerment, justice. And I could see the antagonistic force in this story, which had been the family's reckless disregard for safety humbled and corrected in real time. The tourist stepped closer, capturing the family's acknowledgement of my guidance. The father muttered softly, "Never again will we underestimate nature." And the mother's hand shook slightly. "We've learned the hard way." Even the children seemed to understand the gravity, now their small voices repeating, "Careful, careful, careful." The local ranger asked the father, "Are you prepared to follow the protocols from now on?" He nodded vigorously. "Absolutely." And I could feel the system beginning to correct itself with this single intervention, a ripple effect starting from the narrow cliff path, spreading through observation and awareness. The tourists clapped softly, the parents exhaled again, the children hugged tightly, and I whispered into my camera, "This is what immediate consequences look like: justice, without malice, correction, without arrogance." And I noticed the father looking embarrassed yet empowered. We were foolish and careless. We humiliated ourselves in front of everyone, and I nodded inwardly, knowing that the subtle lesson had been delivered in a way that would last a lifetime. The mother's voice softened. Thanks to Wilson, we understand the risk fully now. And the fog shifted slightly as if nature itself was acknowledging the correction. I typed into my notes. Justice measured 3:56 p.m. empowerment witness support. Humility acknowledgement safety protocols implemented. And realized the spectators were not just observers, but participants in immediate consequence, creating social reinforcement. The father adjusted his hat, muttering, I will never take these cliffs for granted again. And the mother nodded. Our pride costs us fear, but the lesson is unforgettable. The children laughed softly, the tension evaporating, now replaced by cautious joy. The ranger shook his head and muttered, I've never seen someone guide a family so carefully yet firmly. The tourists whisper among themselves, share this with everyone. This is the lesson for all hikers. I felt the satisfaction of seeing a direct, immediate reversal from near disaster to complete safety, a transformation verified by witnesses and documented meticulously, and I whispered under my breath, this is the moment where action, observation, and preparation delivered justice in real time. The father glanced at the annotated map. Once more, I understand. Every risk now, thank you. The mother clasped her hands together. We've been humbled and corrected instantly. The children skipped lightly on the safe path, now their laughter echoing off the cliffs, and I typed the final notes. Consequence, achieve immediate safety, restored empowerment, witness collective awareness, respect for nature, humility, lesson learned. And I knew that in these precise minutes the dynamic of power, responsibility, and acknowledgement had shifted entirely, and the family had been transformed forever under the eyes of nature and witnesses alike. And I whispered into the camera, if this amazed you, share it with someone now, because the impact of witnessing real-time correction and empowerment deserves to be seen and remembered. By 4:05 p.m. the fog had lifted almost entirely, revealing the Pacific Ocean sparkling like scattered diamonds beneath the cliffs, and the family now standing together safe and aware how close they had come to disaster. I felt a profound sense of satisfaction knowing that every detail, observed every precaution taken, and every subtle intervention had culminated in a complete transformation, not only of their immediate fate, but of the collective awareness of everyone present. The father's flannel shirt clung lightly to his back as he exhaled sharply. I feel alive and grateful. The mother adjusted her green windbreaker and whispered, I've never appreciated safety and preparation like this before. The children laughed softly, their red shoes scuffing the gravel lightly, and I felt a pang of nostalgia, remembering my own children at that exact age running to the backyard on Willow Street in Sacramento, their laughter mingling with the wind in my memory. The tourists around us exchanged whispers and smiles. Incredible. He really saved them. We all learned something today, and I realized that the lesson had extended beyond the family to everyone who witnessed it. The local ranger nodded toward me. This is exactly what we need, more of observation, preparation, and calm guidance. And I felt a deep connection to the legacy of careful action. I thought about the years I had invested in hiking trails, studying behavior, noting hazards meticulously in journals annotated with exact dates. Times and observations from as early as 2000, for all of it had led to this very moment, and I whispered under my breath, preparation is power, and careful attention saves lives. The father glanced at the annotated map one final time. We underestimated everything. We were reckless and arrogant. And the mother nodded slowly. We've been humbled and transformed instantly. I noticed the children clinging to their toys, yet smiling now, genuinely confident and safe, and I whispered into my camera, this is the transformational lesson that resonates beyond fear into awareness, responsibility, and empowerment. I turned to the tourists who had captured every step and said, if this moved you, share it with someone now, because the impact of seeing awareness, preparation, and action unfold is invaluable. The father exhaled sharply. We will never take the cliffs lightly again. The mother added, and we'll make sure our friends and family understand the risks too. And I felt a ripple of positive influence spreading from this single incident into the broader world. The wind carried the scent of wet pine mixed with salt from the ocean. The sun, glinting off the mist-dusted leaves, illuminating the small details I had observed all these years, every texture, every sound, every shift in light and shadow, contributing to profound clarity of the moment. I typed rapidly into my notes. Transformation achieved 4:05 p.m. observation, preparation, empowerment lesson, shared collective awareness. And I realized the story had completed its arc from near catastrophe through strategic intervention to lasting enlightenment. The children skipped lightly along the trail. The father took careful steps, guiding them, now aware and humbled, and the mother smiled softly. "We've been given a second chance, and we'll respect it always," I whispered under my breath. This is the ultimate reflection, the culmination of investment, attention, and strategic calm. I remember my own experiences growing up in the 70s listening to my father warn about risks and respect nature, the smell of coffee, the sound of my mother's sewing machine, the texture of a worn quilt. These small lessons imprinted over decades, now resurfacing as guidance I could pass silently to others. Through careful action, I turned to the camera and spoke softly. If you learn from this moment, engage with it. Leave a comment below, share your own experiences, hit the like button, and subscribe to follow more stories where careful observation and strategic action transform lives. I paused and whispered, "Activate the notifications so you never miss another story where ordinary moments become extraordinary through awareness and preparation." The tourists began to disperse slowly, their phones and cameras recording the event. I typed the final notes: CTA engagement, emotional connection, growth, community. 4, 10 p.m. reflection, transformation, lesson, empowerment. The family lingered one last time, look over the cliff edge, breathing in the scent of ocean salt and pine, and I whispered, "Never underestimate preparation, never underestimate attention to detail, and never forget that every moment of observation can save lives and transform futures." The sun, now glinting fully off the cliffs, a breeze, carrying faint laughter and distant waves. I felt a quiet satisfaction of witnessing a complete arc from fear and humiliation to empowerment, and all the father whispered softly, "We'll remember this forever." The mother nodded, "And we'll teach our children the importance of respect, awareness, and preparation." And I smiled faintly, feeling the weight of decades of experience distilled into a single pivotal event. I turned to the camera one last time, saying, "Remember, engage, comment, share, subscribe, and stay vigilant, because the ordinary can become extraordinary in the blink of an eye if you observe, prepare, and act." And as I stepped back from the cliff edge, the mist rolled gently behind me, the sun glinting on every detail I had cataloged over the years. And I felt a calm satisfaction knowing that the journey of injustice, near disaster, revelation, and transformation had been fully realized, leaving a lesson that would echo for years to come. And as the family descended safely toward the parking lot, I whispered again under my breath, "Every observation matters, every act counts, every moment is an opportunity to transform fear into empowerment and chaos into lasting clarity."